Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
There you are. I guess we can give it a couple minutes because I think that there were people who registered. They may just not be here yet. So I want
Okay.
to give like 3 more minutes and then we can get started.
Sounds good. And then question for you, is there a way that I can control the slide deck? Like, can you switch the control to me at any point? Oh, wait, it's letting
Uh,
me. It looks like I
yeah,
can right now. Okay, so
yeah, I made you a presenter.
okay, great. Because some of them are like animated, so they pop up in the same slide one at a time. So I just
Perfect.
and then I think like there were some obvious spots. The other spot where I would love to just chime in would be when in the slide talking about open versus closed donations and things like that, just talking about, the future.
Yeah,
Kind of what I've seen in my practice with my clients. So okay. And then other than that, I guess should I text you if there's anything and you'll text me
sure.
or is it
Does
easier to do
this,
a Teams chat? I think
I think
it's
probably text. When
okay.
with regards to the slides, does it look like a slide presentation to you? Um, or does it look, I don't know. The view that I see does not, it's not like a whole screen type of thing.
Oh, no, I'm seeing it as slides. I'm trying to see if yeah, okay. My changes are in there. It looks like slides, more or less.
Okay.
So, um, it might just be the way that we're looking at them, but it's definitely not showing notes or anything like that.
Okay, cool. Hmm.
Is there anyone in the waiting room?
I don't see anyone in the waiting room.
So is the plan to just go ahead and record it then, or do we want to? Okay.
Yeah, and
I
then
mean,
I'll
we're
just
here, so
put it up on YouTube after.
that's good.
Hi, Judah. Oh, he's muted.
Okay, so then it may end up being quite a bit shorter than the hour. Sounds like.
Yeah, cool. All right. You want to, I guess we can get started. And if people do end up joining a little later, they can just hop in as they come. Um, so I guess I'll get started. My name is Ari Cohen. Uh, is it recording? Happy Pride, Judah. Make sure. Okay. Um, Hi, I'm Ari Cohen. I am on the executive board of the Chicago Coalition for Family Building. Um, and I'm excited to present with Nidhi, the Building LGBTQ plus families in today's climate presentation. On behalf of the Chicago Coalition for Family Building, I would like to also take this moment to thank our sponsor, Faring Pharmaceuticals. So thank you, Faring, and happy Pride. Let's go ahead and get started. After Nidhi, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Nidhi Desai. I am an attorney who has practiced in the space for about 28 years, and I am also on the board for the Chicago Coalition for Family Building, and I'm also the incoming president for the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys. I'm excited to be here and to celebrate Pride with all of you.
Excellent. All right. So I'll get started by just kind of laying out a quick roadmap for this session. We're kind of going to, from a bird's eye view, look at how, the potential options to parenthood for LGBTQ plus families, as well as some of the key legal, financial, medical health considerations that go into choosing the right pathway to parenthood for your family. And then we're going to wrap up with some practical next steps and some further resources that you can look into after this presentation to get a better sense of, how you want to go about this at times complex process. Okay. So just to kind of highlight from a broad view, an overview of common family building pathways. Obviously, there are a lot of options here, and I want to stress that, there's no right way to build your family. Oh, perfect. Oh, these are a multitude of options that exist. To build your family at the right one for you is not necessarily the right one for everyone. So there are the biological and fertility routes, IVF, IUI, which are slightly different from one another. There's surrogacy, which we'll talk about in a little bit more depth later, donor conception, adoption, foster care, as well as some newer ones, which, co-parenting agreements, as well as kinship care, which I didn't know a ton about, but kinship care is when you move forward with formal adoption of a existing relative. And just as a note, various combinations and hybrid paths of this are common. I am also a father in a married to a man. Um, my husband and I went through the IVF and surrogacy route for our kids. Oh, let's. Nidhi, are you still seeing?
I'm
Which
still
slide are
seeing
you
the
seeing?
for the
Only
building
the first one.
LGBT. Yeah, but I don't know if that's just me.
Judah,
Judah,
what
what
slide
slide
are
are
you
you
seeing?
seeing?
Okay.
Okay.
All
Here, let me try forwarding it and see if that
right.
works. Judah, do you see the next slide now?
Are you on the opening slide in your screen, Nidhi?
No, now I'm on the second slide. I moved it.
Okay.
Can
Oh,
you see the second slide now?
he says he's able to move on to the next slide himself, actually. That's
But
so
I think
bizarre.
it's going to be an issue for the participants.
For sure. One second. Okay.
This is
Do you
a
want to try
new.
and click to the next slide,
Yeah,
Nidhi?
I'm going to move to slide number 3. Overview of common family building pathways. Kinship care is the last one. It's probably what you were on.
Okay,
Oh, okay. All right.
cool.
Well, maybe I'll advance then, I guess, if it's working on my end. I don't know. Or you could try
Perfect.
advancing now, Ari, and see what happens.
Yeah. Let me go to slide 4. Let me know if you see it. I am on slide 4.
No.
Oh, here, actually. Okay, now you go ahead, Nidhi.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, that works for me.
Okay. do that. All right, cool. All right, did you want to finish this up before we moved on?
Yeah, I was just pointing out, there's no right way to do this. Depending on your specific circumstance. I kind of mentioned this. I have twins with my husband. We used IVF and surrogacy with donor eggs and a unknown surrogate. So we went through a surrogacy agency to find her, and she was genetically unrelated to our kids. And we used a an anonymous egg donor. So that was the way we did it. But there's no way of doing it. Like there's no right way of doing it. Whatever works for you is the right way to build your family. So go ahead, Nitty.
Okay. With any luck, the slide is
Yes.
advancing. Okay, so when you're building your family with the help of a donor, and we're going to try to break things out a little bit and talk about them, not one by one, but at least in groups to make it a little bit less confusing. I'm just going to talk about some of the issues you want to be thinking about. And of course, you'll be going into much more depth with your attorney, matching program, et cetera, if and when you decide to go down this path. So the first question is, we're always asking, how is the state going to see your family? So we have very old traditional presumptions about parentage. And the good news is in so many states we've updated them, but the very traditional presumptions are that the woman who gives birth to the child is the mother of the child, and the man to whom she's married is the father. That's where you start. Those presumptions started at a time where you could not build your family through assisted reproduction, right? There was no medical technology. So at that moment in time, a lot of those presumptions made sense. But now we have changes in our state laws. We have changes in our case law that allow us to see families in, I think, a more authentic way and legally recognize them as such. So based on what we call intent, the idea that whoever it is who intended to be the parents prior to the start of all of the medical procedures or the at-home inseminations, those are the people meant to be the parents. But you have to go through legal steps to effectuate that. So you want to lay down those expectations clearly before you do anything at all, hopefully with an attorney so that everyone has independent representation and if something goes sideways during the pregnancy or before there's a time for a second parent adoption, a confirmatory adoption, you have some evidence of everyone's intent. And then after birth, or sometimes pre-birth, you will pursue the appropriate court procedures, whether that be a confirmatory adoption, a parentage order. There are lots of devices at your disposal, depending on what state you're on. But the most important thing is to make sure that that donor is not legally recognized as a parent, both for their sake and, of course, for yours and for the child. And then when it comes time for the birth, people get, I think, confused between a lot of things. So one is the birth certificate. If you're a married couple, then you can, by operation of law, just have the second person entered as the parent's child. So if I give birth to a child and my wife wants to become the parent of the child, you can do that without doing anything else. However, that's just a presumption, and that presumption can be rebutted with evidence. And so that's why a court order is really critical, even if you are married. VAPs are another tool. VAPs are voluntary acknowledgements of parentage. There are several states who allow for this in cases of same-sex families. Illinois is one of the ones that just recently changed their laws so that as of January 1st of this year, we can do this. But that's not available in every state. So that confirmatory or second parent adoption is going to be really critical. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of this. And of course, we could go into a lot more detail about all of it. But I'm going to turn it back over to Ari to talk about the next issue.
Sure. So these are just some medical and fertility considerations. Obviously, the LGBTQ plus umbrella encapsulates a whole range of different people. And so obviously there are different considerations depending on your specific circumstance. For trans and gender diverse folks, obviously we're going to have a little bit of a different consideration than for two cis males or two cis females, or whatever it is. Fertility preservation options comes into the picture here, sperm and egg freezing. And even when we start digging into that, there's actually been a lot of forward movement, I would say, from a technological standpoint, and for also from a financial standpoint, with some new companies that are kind of broadening the options for people through some creative mechanisms. Like there's a company that does a egg freezing benefit for free, as long as you donate half of the egg harvest to that company. There are also effects of hormones in surgery that need to be considered before you dig into your family building mechanism. There are, again, a ton of considerations for cisgender partners. Are you going to do IVF, IUI? Those two are different. IUI is generally when washed sperm is put into the uterus, sometimes at home, or in with consultation with a REI, versus IVF, which is a little bit more involved. I know my husband and I used IVF, specifically ICSI, which is where a single sperm cell is injected into a donor or other egg, which gives a little bit more control to the process. And there are other intra-partner options. But it's really important to find LGBTQ competent providers here, and keep tabs on your preconception health. I have conversations frequently with people who are, just starting this process or in the midst of this process. And I think it's really important, as you start walking down this path, regardless of what your specific situation is, to acknowledge that the physicians that you're working with have worked with LGBTQ plus families in the past, and are interested in doing that, and are kind of aware of the specific considerations that go into this. I Just as an example, all of the agencies that my husband and I worked with were, pretty well established in the LGBTQ plus family building space. But I have had some acquaintances, and I've heard some stories about people who went with clinics that didn't have that type of experience. And, it was just a little bit more challenging for them, because there are different considerations. Like if your egg donor is not also going to be the potential parent, making sure that they keep on tabs with their medications can be something that you don't always think about, because they don't, other than potentially a financial interest, they don't always have the driving psychological interest in building a family, if that child is not eventually going to be their child. So I think it really depends on your specific situation, but working with providers who have that LGBTQ plus experience, I think, is really important, and something that you should definitely make sure your clinic has, as you start walking down this path. Next slide.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about this from sort of my perspective, having walked down this road with a lot of clients, and then Ari may have some insights, having lived through it. But the first thing that we're going to address is when you're considering donation, whether it be egg or sperm, known versus, and I should have changed this slide to say non-identified. It's very well established at this point that there's no such thing as an anonymous donor. So actually, maybe it's best that we highlight it and disabuse ourselves of that notion. But with 23andMe, with all of the different types of direct-to-consumer testing, we have found over the last 10 years or so that you will always find your donor if you look for them. And people who are conceived through the same donors are finding them each other. Um, so one of the things that you want to think about before you even start having a family is it important for you to know who your donor was? Do you want to have a path back to your donor in the event of a medical issue or your child is curious, any of the above? And, I'm now hearing from clients from 20 plus years ago who didn't have these options, and their kids are very much wanting to have more information and they don't have it ready, at the ready. And so it's hard at the moment where all you want to do is have a baby to be thinking ahead 5, 10, 20, 30 years, but really important to do so. And there are a lot of professionals, mental health professional, the doctor, your lawyer, who can help you think about these things. And there are various methods of communication, including registries that don't have identifying information or simply exchanging information. So you have emails, or setting up email addresses that are non-identifying so you can communicate, but you're not planning to regularly. So I think whatever your level of comfort is, there is a solution for that. And nothing is foolproof, of course, unless you do know each other's identities in full, in which case you can always find each other. And then when you're looking for a donor, you're going to want to be thinking about the considerations of screening. How is this donor screened? To what extent has she donated before? Because every donor has a different reaction to medication. And then the advantages of a fresh donation versus frozen. I think sometimes people will tell you it's much better to have a lot, LOT, as opposed to many, a lot of eggs, which might range from like 7 to 9 eggs, as opposed to using a fresh donor because it's set and you're going to get them and there's no variables there. However, from a cost perspective, it often makes more sense to do a fresh donation, and from an information perspective in terms of getting medical history, et cetera. So there are a lot of considerations at play there, to think about. And Ari?
Yeah, and I'll just yeah, let me just jump in here. So, my husband and I used an unknown to us donor through an agency, and I will point out that something that was unexpected for us was kind of the financial aspect of using a so-called anonymous donor with regards to insurance coverage for fertility medications. Um, we had a lot of trouble getting our insurance to cover those fertility medications because we couldn't point to someone who was using them because this donor was anonymous to us. And that meant that we couldn't actually file a claim in her name, which, which led us just paying out of pocket for the fertility medications and then going back to file a claim later. But we didn't have our donors' information for that. So that is something that we had to consider. I don't think I'll just say it like for the most part, insurance coverage in the fertility space is not set up for LGBTQ plus families. It's getting better slowly, but something even if it's important to think through and be really cognizant of your insurance coverage. Any donor or surrogate, any sort of insurance coverage that they have, and plan to, if you're trying to get parts of this process covered, it's going to be, it can be a challenge at times. Because again, these processes are mostly set up for cis straight couples, because that's the majority of the people who are seeking fertility care. But it is possible to work with your insurance provider, even with regards to some of the intricacies of LGBTQ plus family building.
And your
So
provider should be helping you with that as well. They should be the ones who are reaching out to the insurance company saying, and there is a mechanism for these non-identified donors to get covered if you have coverage for egg donation. But but hopefully you can leverage them as well because they should definitely be part of the picture here. You shouldn't be struggling on your own to do this.
yeah. So another option, other than having biological children, is adoption and foster care. There are again, like everything else in this space, there are a wealth of options, from domestic private adoption, public foster to adopt programs, international adoption. With regards to international adoption, that is also potentially tricky for LGBTQ plus families, um, because in some countries they just don't allow gay families to adopt. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, if that's something you're interested in pursuing. The adoption process, versus the biological process is, in I've seen it be a lot more of a range in terms of the amount of time that it can take. I have heard of adoptions being as quick as a couple of months after you've been accepted into a um, agency, to potentially years, where they are trying to match you with, kind of the child that you are seeking to adopt. Um, but definitely, even with domestic adoption, it's important that you work with someone or a group who is LGBTQ plus friendly, because some of them are not, and that can potentially put a challenge in your planning as well.
Yeah, and I will add to that, that some of them are not, we are also seeing the erosion of some of the policies and the case law that was put into place to avoid discrimination in terms of who you work with. But even if adoption agency is purporting to work with LGBTQ families, I would ask them how many they've worked with in the last year, because some of them will say that they do because they feel like they have to, but when it comes down to actually working with them, it makes the experience really stressful, and you don't feel validated or valued as a person, and nobody needs that. There are a lot of people out there who are not that way, so definitely I would dig deeper into their values and their track record before deciding to work with them. And whether you're talking about a domestic private adoption or with international adoptions, there are lots of limitations with other countries who will not allow same-sex couples to adopt. And so sometimes people end up doing that as a single person, which has a whole host of other issues. So there's just a lot to tread there.
Yeah, so surrogacy, and gestational carriers. um, Gestational versus traditional surrogacy. I think traditionally, traditional surrogacy is where the surrogate gestational carrier and the egg donor are the same person. Um, for the most part, I think the recommendation has moved away from that into just a gestational carrier, in which the gestational carrier or surrogate is not genetically related to the potential child. So you would have a separate egg donor, to that gestational carrier. Um, the recommendation has moved away from traditional surrogacy just because it's much riskier from a legal standpoint, because the a surrogate who has a biological link to the child is just more likely to decide that they actually don't want to do a surrogacy and they actually do want to keep the child. And it's just a little bit more challenging legally from that perspective. My husband and I used a gestational carrier who was again not genetically related to our embryos. And it worked out really well for us. We still have a relationship with our gestational carrier. We text her a couple of times a year because that was a huge sacrifice for her, and it was, you know, we wouldn't have our family without it. But I also understand how and why we've kind of moved away from the traditional surrogacy. Model just because it's, you know, the biological processes are challenging, and I could definitely see how traditional surrogate would have a much deeper connection to her biological child if she was carrying, you know, her own genetic child. Um, that being said, even with a gestational carrier who does not have any genetic tie to the child or children she's carrying, there's a lot of legal contracts that go into this. Rightly so. And you know, there you can go through an agency or you can go independently. I personally tend to recommend that people go through an agency just because there are a lot of moving pieces to this. It's not just, oh, I found someone that, you know, we'll go ahead with that. There is a lot of screening that goes into surrogacy selection, especially with an agency. I think when I spoke to our agency, they said that somewhere around 90% of the women who apply to be surrogates don't, you know, make it to be an actual surrogate just because there are medical screenings, there are psychological screenings, there are family life screenings. They need to have had kids before. They need to not want to have any more kids after the surrogacy, just in case. And, you know, there are just so many different factors that go into a successful gestational carrier that you want to have in place. You know, this makes it makes total sense to have these limitations in place. But I think one of the things that an agency grants versus, you know, looking for yourself is just a sort of a peace of mind that this person has been screened as much as possible and has um, signed off on everything before you actually start any of the medical processes. Um, so that's really important. If you're going to do it independently, make sure that you are involving someone who has experience legally, you know, a lawyer who has experience in this family building space, to make sure that everything's set up that way and that your medical and psychological screenings are still done, because those are important. They're there for a reason.
Yeah, and I'll add to that the gestational versus what we now call genetic or traditional surrogacy. The issue there is that it in most states, and it's not true anymore in every state, but in most states, a genetic or traditional surrogate is seen as a birth mother, which means that she cannot relinquish her rights to her child until after the child is born. So I've been involved in a number of successful arrangements, but it is very legally risky because you can't think of it as your child, right? You can't think of this pregnancy as a person carrying your child. It might be one of your children and her child, but then if there's a dispute later on, it becomes like a custody battle. It becomes a question of how the courts view that. It can be, you know, the reason people gravitate towards it is because it feels a lot simpler. It's a lot less expensive. It feels more streamlined. And if you have somebody like a sister who is willing to act as both, it feels silly to not take advantage of that. But it helps, I think, sometimes to know the reason behind it, to know why it's not the greatest idea. And then it's a question of getting all the information at your disposal and then making an informed decision about whether to move forward one way or the other. And with an independent arrangement, the other thing I will add is that there are resources that you can use to help bolster it. So there are some, for example, matching programs who will do agency, what they call agency assisted, arrangements where they will then do the screening, get the medical records, you'll identify the surrogate, and that will save you some money. But of course, it will also cost some money to do that way. So there are options a little bit outside the box that you can employ if you find that you want to go down that route.
Okay, next slide.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was trying.
So
Oh,
this is the big one. I think I have, again, a lot of conversations with people, and the financial aspect of it is huge. This is a expensive process. I'm going to be totally transparent. Any way you do it is going to be kind of expensive. It ranges from kind of expensive to very expensive. And a lot of the times insurance isn't super helpful, especially if you're thinking about surrogacy. They rarely cover it unless it's a specialized insurance. There are now employee fertility benefits that work like regular insurance, but they're specific for fertility. That being said, I have found for the most part, those aren't widely adopted with most companies because they're really expensive. So most of where I've seen those get adopted are, pretty profitable, like large tech companies. Um, and that, that's not, there are some other options like companies that do adopt those, but for the most part, if you're just trying to go through this process with your regular health insurance company, it's going to be expensive. Obviously, the cost ranges by the pathway that you go, and insurance coverage varies wildly, especially state to state. There are some states that are now starting to ensure that your insurance has to cover some aspects of this process, but rarely is the whole thing covered with regular health insurance. That being said, there are grants available. The Chicago Coalition for Family Building is we give grants. I think we have given over $2 million in grants at this point. So if you would like to apply for grants, please go to our website. It's on, I think, the last slide of this presentation. Um, there are sliding scale clinics that I'll be totally honest, I don't know too much about those, but they do exist. Some people go through crowdfunding. There are the employer fertility benefits that I briefly touched on, and there are subsidies for Medicaid and foster kids. Um, but I will point this out again and again. This is an expensive process. Whether you go the adoption route, whether you go the IVF fertility route, it's not cheap, and I think that is off-putting to a lot of people. Um, there are, within the last couple of years, companies that are trying to meet the demand of, not necessarily cheaper fertility care, but more standardized processes and kind of a one-time payment basket that ensures a certain number of eggs will be harvested, embryos created, that make it potentially a little bit more cost effective to go through this. But I think it's important to be clear-eyed about it. Cheaper is not always better. There's often the drive to kind of see what could be the financial outlay for these processes and then start wanting to figure out where you can cut down on cost. Um, in my opinion, it's generally inadvisable to try and make this as cheap as possible. Because while it is an expensive process, there are reasons for that. You're paying for legal advice, you're paying for the knowledge that people have amassed over years and years here. You're paying for the screening, you're paying for medications, et cetera, et cetera. But with that being said, there are ways to cut the costs, but when it comes to trying to make this as cheap as possible, be really sure what those costs that you're cutting are, and make sure that you're comfortable with, maybe reduced services if you're going to start cutting costs there.
I would just add to that, don't take things for granted too, because oftentimes I will have a client who's been told that their surrogate's insurance isn't going to cover their pregnancy, for example, but then when we do a deeper dive into the insurance, it in fact should cover it. So there are companies out there who will do reviews of the insurance. So don't make any assumptions going in, but the insurance that's available to you, and then the kind of little bricks that you can put into place along the way can help mitigate some of the risk that you're taking in moving forward with this very, as Ari said, expensive process. Okay, so emotional and social supports. Do you want to start, Ari?
Sure. The last webinar we had on behalf of the Chicago Coalition for Family Building was last month, and we actually dug pretty deeply into the mental health support for infertility, which plays a huge role. It's a little bit different if you're talking about LGBTQ plus family building, because a lot of the times the infertility is less of a medical consideration, um, and more of just it can be just a financial consideration. Um, but I think it's important to have mental health support as you go through this process, because rarely is it as cut and dry as, moving from point A to B to C. Things take longer than you think. There are things that happen along the way that aren't really anyone's fault, whether that be medical, whether that be, an egg donor who has an adverse reaction to the hormones and decides that she actually does not want to go through with this process. And then, that's can be a mental health challenge if you've kind of gotten in your mind that this is who you want to try and build a family, or your family with. Um, but that being said, this is a community that is really supportive of each other. I have some more resources at the end of this slide, and a lot of that is community based. We, as the LGBTQ plus family, we have all had similar challenges in building our families. We know what it's like to go through this process and the challenges that are involved there. And I think that we are very supportive of each other. And it's important to find people who you can talk to about, your process, and seek support from people who have maybe gone through the same challenges that you're currently going through as you try and build your family. Obviously, support for partners is a huge aspect here, as well as kind of talking to any children that you may already have, or the rest of your family who maybe have an idea of what this process looks like but aren't in it. And also just navigating stigma and safety considerations, depending on where you live, that can take various forms. Uh, there are, plenty of people out there who still have negative views of LGBTQ plus families, and that's part of it. But navigating that stigma with a supportive community, and again, talking to the people who have gone through it, is hugely important. So, from a general practical timeline, um, and obviously this is the view from 40,000 feet. But generally, you're going to want to talk to your partner if you have one. There are plenty of people who go through this process as a single parent. But you're just going to want to kind of clarify your goals, make sure that everyone's on the same page, and start with your medical consultation. If you are going to start with a sperm donation, make sure that everything is medically feasible. from the outset there, or do the same with your eggs. Um, Finding an agency if you're going to decide to go through the agency route. Oftentimes, if you do go through the agency route, then they will be able to put you in touch with a lawyer or a legal consultation who has experience in this space. Um, we touched on this, but financial planning, um, it's an expensive process. I wholeheartedly encourage you to try and get your insurance to cover as much as possible, but even still, it is likely to be a significant financial outlay. Um, look at the various pathways to parenthood, and choose the one that you think will work best for you. And keep your options open as much as possible. Prepare your paperwork, and I think if there's one thing to take away from this, it's that timelines are extremely variable. I think for my husband and I, it took us about 2.5 years, between starting to gather information about the process to actually having the birth of our children. And that I would say it was actually quite quick, comparatively. We didn't really face any big time medical issues. So I think it can be done quicker, than about 2.5 years. But between all the paperwork and making sure all of the medical aspects line up properly, I would say, don't assume that this is going to happen in a year. That is probably unlikely, but not impossible.
I would agree with that. I think that, one of the first things that you're going to want to do is figure out what kind of thinker you are. So you might have the opportunity to attend a conference or some place where you can gather a lot of information. It might make sense for you to meet with an attorney very early on so they can kind of walk you through each part of the process, and help you clarify what your next steps should be, finding a medical provider, looking for a matching program, getting your finances in order, all of those things before you get started. And other people have had the guidance of a friend or family member, and they kind of know exactly which way they're headed in, so they can proceed that way. But I think a realistic timeline, for sure, is probably 2 years from the time you really get started getting serious, and probably a year from the time that you have embryos formed, as well as have identified a matching program, and a physician. Okay, so I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about the legal process for establishing parentage in a gestational surrogacy arrangement. And I think one of the trickiest things about this is what state law is going to govern. And it's not always the same answer. It depends a lot on what two states are involved, because there are going to be circumstances under which the state in which the baby's born will not recognize you as an intended parent because they base their law based on genetics, et cetera. We're seeing some regression in some of the laws, in various states at this moment. So it's very important that you are talking to an attorney who is well versed in this area, and that you're careful about when you agree to abide by the law of a jurisdiction. Generally, if it's a state where you don't have great surrogacy laws, you want to have it only for cooperative parenting procedures. And then for everything else, you might decide that you want to use the other state. Um, Independent versus matching programs, the process may look a little bit different from a timing standpoint. And I always tell clients it's a time versus money thing, right? When you are deciding when do you start the legal process with a particular gestational surrogate, because some people will say, well, she's been preliminarily medically cleared. We're willing to take this risk because we want to have a transfer in sooner rather than later. For other people, waiting the 4 to 8 weeks after the complete medical clearance is done is totally fine. And so it's really going to become an individual decision that you can discuss with your lawyer and figure that out. And then in terms of the contracts and the parenting phase of this arrangement. Those are two distinct phases. So the contract phase is where everyone outlines everyone's rights and responsibilities. And I think the most important takeaway for this, because we are looking at this from 40,000 feet, is that it's your baby, but it's her pregnancy. And so respecting her rights to make healthcare decision making, making sure you're aligned on things like what happens if there's a fetal abnormality, et cetera, are critically important because those are not things you're going to enforce via contract. You can't force someone to undergo a medical procedure that they don't want to. You can't scare them into agreeing to do something like that. It's against public policy. It's not ethical. There are lots of reasons why we can't do that, even though it feels like you should have control, right, over your over the decisions that are made during pregnancy, because ultimately it's your child. And I think that's one of the hardest things about gestational surrogacy arrangements. And to the extent that it helps, the way that I think about it is that there are many countries where you cannot undergo a gestational surrogacy arrangement. And the reason that we can in this country is because we have figured out state by state how to create ethical, legal frameworks for surrogacy that respect the dignity of all of the parties involved. And because of that, we can enter into these arrangements. But by the same token, that also means that there's a loss of control there during the pregnancy that you just have to respect. And so the most important arrangement relationship you're going to have through all of that is with the surrogate, so that she does feel committed to you, to your family. And I've seen, you know, thousands of successful arrangements over the years as a result of that. So from a parentage perspective, you once the contracts are done, you have your embryo transfer, and then parentage happens usually around starting anywhere from week 14 to 18 of the pregnancy. Sooner the better, especially because if there is a premature birth, you want to make sure your parentage is secure. That it's typically done through a court process. In Illinois, there's an administrative process, and then we follow that up with a court process for any same-sex family, particularly, or international couple. And those documents provide you the legal security of knowing that you are the child's sole legal parents, that no one else is a potential parent, and then allows you to kind of move on with the rest of your life and worry about all of the typical things that you worry about once you become a parent. So it is, you know, with the right professionals involved, it can be as painless of a possible process as possible. Quad A, which is the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys, it's an organization of vetted attorneys who have all had to apply and have had experience in the area. The American Bar Association also has a reproductive technology law section that people can sign up for, which provides continuing legal education. But it's really important that you work with somebody and ask them how many agreements have you done last year? How long have you been practicing? What percentage of your practice is devoted to this area? Because the minute something goes sideways, you want somebody with experience, the ability to meet halfway and kind of keep this end goal in mind, which is having a birth that is easy and everyone is at, and your relationship is still good at that point. When something comes up during the pregnancy, it's important, very critically important for everyone to just sort of like keep their cool and keep their heads together so that we can come up with a solution that's going to best serve your family. And having said that, by and large, most people go through their pregnancy with no issues at all. So that's the goal, that you put the agreement down and you put it in a drawer and you never have to take it out again. But if you do, you should make sure you have professionals in your corner. And so with that, I will leave you with this additional resources page for information on all of these topics that we've discussed today. And Ari, I will turn it to you for the last word.
Yeah, so I just want to thank you, Nidhi, for helping me out with this. Fantastic work. Lots of great information. If you are watching and would like to look into some additional resources that dig in a little bit deeper to a lot of the things that we've spoken about, we represent the Chicago Coalition for Family Building. Please feel free to check out the website. If you are eligible for a grant, if you live in the Chicagoland area, please go ahead and apply. We have given, again, I think over $2 million in grants. I was a grant recipient at one point myself, so huge impact there. And then there are a couple of nonprofits that also dig into these processes and will be able to give you some more information than we were able to touch on in this hour-long presentation. Families Out Loud is a relatively recent entry to these, the nonprofit space here. Resolve is a national infertility association that deals with infertility of all types and has been really relevant in the LGBTQ plus family space. In that capacity, Men Having Babies is a legacy organization. Despite the name, it is, broadly applicable to LGBTQ plus people, not just men. And then I think Nidhi talked about the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys. Again, you should have a good lawyer as you're going through this process. So please feel free to check those out, and hopefully they'll answer any of the questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Cool. And I think that is just about the amount of time that we have. Thank you for joining. I hope this was helpful. Happy Pride. And we'll see you for the next webinar.
Happy Pride, everyone.
Bye-bye.